Okay, this is session 7, and we are talking about balance and organizing principles. Organizing principles are those things by which we arrange and organize a design. And we've talked about several of them already, but just want to take a moment to give a solid overview and a solid understanding before we move on. The primary issue with any design is unity. Unity relates to the Gestalt idea of wholeness, completeness, that everything is working together to express the entire design, and the entire design is greater in importance than each of its parts. Unity is basically the goal of every element that you place in a design. The idea of, you can relate it to the idea of irreducible complexity, where you have everything that's needed for the design to function, nothing more and nothing less. If things are missing, the design's not going to function. And if you have too many things, you have things that are extraneous, you don't need them. So the idea of unity is that everything is working together, there's nothing out of place. There is nothing that is a mistake in the design. There's nothing that doesn't belong, and you don't have an overabundance of things. You basically have just what you need, nothing more and nothing less. One of the ways that we achieve unity is through the idea of balance, and balance relates to the Gestalt idea of equilibrium or prägnanz. The idea of excellence, stability, and we'll even call it perfection. Balance itself is the idea of force and counterforce, weight and counterweight, and balance brings security and stability into a design, into a space, and we are comfortable. We prefer things that are balanced and excellent. So we look at the Rembrandt etching here. We have a darker area in the left-hand corner, and we have a lighter area where the figures are. And this is the darkest and the lightest area in the design. And over here we have a larger area that is mostly gray, kind of the blending of the dark and the light making this. And so the larger area of gray with its slightly more simplistic expression balances out the more complex areas and the lighter areas where the figures are. Notice also the real strong sense of implied line going diagonally through the piece. Rhythm is another idea, another principle that unifies a design. Rhythm is movement that's created by repetition. And if we look at this Feinegger piece, we see that certain angles, certain directions are repeated in this painting. We have circular elements, kind of spirals that are being repeated. We also have a lot of angularities, and so it takes on an overall prismatic understanding. And there is a certain sense of beat or cadence to this. This is not a soft lyrical piece. It's got some power and it's got some oomph to it. And rhythm in design in art kind of relates to rhythm in music, where you have a cadence, you have a speed, a rate at which the music flows, the downbeats, the intervals, the pauses, things like that. Those things happen visually in design. Proportion and scale we've already talked about, and looking at this image we'll just say specifically that the woman holding the cake is out of proportion to the room that she's in. If she takes a few steps backward to stand by the stove, she's going to knock her head on the ceiling. So she is photoshopped in, and she is really too large in the space given where she's standing and given the scale of the room. So she is overscale and therefore out of proportion with the scale of the room. Motion is the idea of movement in a design, the idea that something in the design is going to move or is moving. And motion is basically defined as a change in location that takes time to do. And so in this photograph we have a sense of anticipated motion in terms of a lot of the seated figures, but the blurriness of the figure on the bicycle is definitely in motion compared to the static quality of everything around her. Time relates to motion. Time requires motion in order to understand that time has passed, and motion requires time to execute, so they are kind of intertwined. Time is a duration that is measurable, and so there's a start and a stop to it. And two-dimensionally, one of the ways that we do express time is through a timeline, or shall we say, a sequence of work and a step-by-step process. It can also be expressed through something as simple as a storyboard or panel cartoon. So we're looking at Calvin talking with Steve Jobs, and to read this takes time, but to go from panel to panel and engage in the conversations going on also indicates a passage of time. Repetition. Basically, repetition is recurrence of similar or same elements within a design. It can also be color, it can be directions, it can be shapes, it can be linear things, it can be texture, it can be a variety of things. It can even be interval, negative space. In the Mondrian, what is repeated most obviously are all the curved lines, creating the sense of the tree limbs, and even the tree trunk is curved. And even though they're all going different directions, all those lines are repeated throughout. All those curves are repeated, and that establishes unity from one side of the painting to the other. The other thing that is repeated is the achromatic color scheme. There's very little sense of chroma in this. Mostly it's black, white, and gray in our understanding. Pattern is repetition that is orderly, methodical, planned. And if you recall back to our first project, you were to think of surface pattern rather than illustration or storytelling to state your case of going from order to chaos. So you were dealing with pattern both with order and with chaos, but there is a sense of planning and deliberateness to a pattern. And once you establish a pattern, you can keep going, and then it starts making sense within a design. Balance is one of those primary things that leads us toward unified design. And balance, again, is the idea of excellence, the idea of stabilizing elements within the design. And balance is actually something we look for and require. If you think about yourself physically, being out of balance can be dangerous. You can fall down. There is a need for counterbalance if you are out of balance. So balance is very important in our visual understanding as well. And balance, again, is something that if you approach a design and it's not balanced, you're going to experience some discomfort with it. There's going to be something off that you're not going to want to hang around and deal with for very long. And so we tend, when things are not balanced, we tend to turn away from them. We tend to avoid them. Balance itself is an issue of weight and position and direction in a design. As we look at this image, we see this white curved line that changes direction, it has a faster curve and it moves further away to the right from this center point than this does. This has a slower curve, and the distance, the horizontal distance here, is a lot shorter. If you'll notice, these vertical lines are varied in their line quality, and the grouping of them is, even in the group of them, it's not quite as strong as the diagonality in the curve and the consistency, the thickness of the white curved line here. And what's happening is that this is the balance point, this is the axis for the entire design, and this is really stable. It's vertical top to bottom and allowing the diagonal and then the change of the direction to work off of it. And it even allows for the curve of the instrument behind to fit comfortably there. This entire area is balanced by this area. This is larger and simpler. This is smaller and more complex. When we deal with balance, we have to deal with the idea of weight and the idea of visual weight. Visual weight is basically the sense of something having more mass than something else. Darker colors would be weightier than lighter colors, and what I've done here is taken a square that is outlined and unfilled and indicated that it is lighter weight compared to the fill of the black square, and the black square, being visually heavier, is compressing the circle rather than sitting on top of it. Along with visual weight is the idea of a center of gravity. Every shape has a center that we are automatically aware of. And so if we look at this parallelogram, we understand that there's a gravitational center right in here, and our eye is going to search for that and want to land on it. It's basically the balance point for that shape. And we can find it if we draw a frame of reference around the shape. We can actually find that visual center by finding the center of the frame of reference. When we have a group of shapes, each individual shape has its own center of gravity visually. The group of shapes, though, remember the Gestalt theory of proximity, the group will become one thing in our understanding, and we treat it as one thing, and therefore, being one thing, it has that group has its own center of gravity that is separate from the centers of each of the shapes. And so again, we draw a key line, a frame of reference around, and find the center of that frame of reference, and that's the center of the group. That's the balance point for this grouping. And notice that that does not exist within any of the shapes. It's kind of in the negative space. And when we go to balance something, a shape or a grouping of shapes, we're going to balance them based on their center of gravity rather than their edges. When we balance, there's several varieties of balance that we will work with, and within any design you have the opportunity to use different balances within the same design depending upon what you're doing. In a three-dimensional form, like say, I don't know, a dog, you'll have, depending upon how you're looking at the dog, either from the front or the back or sideways or three-quarters, you'll have different types of balance involved in the same form. And the same is true with two-dimensional design. You can have more than one type of balance going on. The most obvious balance is symmetry, and that's also known as formal balance. Symmetry is found a lot in nature, in animals and insects, less so in things like trees, and we'll get it in some flowers but not in all flowers. Basically symmetry is equal weight on either side of an obvious axis. Your third project dealt with symmetry. You had to create a figure ground reversal, and the one half would have to reflect the other half. And so symmetry is very obviously stabilizing. You have the same thing happening on one side of the axis as you do on the other. And as we look at the butterfly, the axis obviously is down the thorax, down the body. And then if we look at the wings on the left and the wings on the right, they're basically mirror images of each other. And that's the idea of symmetry. This bedroom is set up in a pretty much symmetrical way. Obviously we have the lamp, and then we have two pictures in the bed headboards and so forth. And there's minor differences, but this is basically a symmetrical setup. Approximate symmetry, there's some of that going on in this, but approximate symmetry starts with symmetry but then adds variety. Straight up symmetry can be really static, not just stable, but it's static. Approximate symmetry adds some variety just to change things up and make things more interesting. And as we look at this book plate, obviously on the large bulldog we have a orange eye and ear, and we don't have that over here. The letter forms themselves are not set up symmetrically. We have some difference here in the apron, the way the shadows are drawn versus over here. And the main issues of difference are actually within the two smaller dogs. We've got different hats going on, we have different pants, we have different things happening around the spoons. And even notice the negative space here that doesn't exist over here. And we can tell the obvious axis comes straight down the center, and even though it's not an actual line, we understand it and it's very much there, and so we see this is approximately symmetrical. In this photo we have the same idea. We have two Adirondack chairs that are basically mirror images of each other. We have a Swiss cheese indoor-outdoor carpet, and we can basically divide that photograph straight down between the chairs and come straight down through the carpeting to the baseline of the image. We have a table that is also centered, but we have a vase that nudges to the left and a bowl that nudges to the right. And we have some flowers, some stems, and there is a reach going off to the upper right. We have a yellow pillow. We have a wide but vertically short light area. And on this side we have a long and vertically thin area. And what's happening is the yellow bowl and this reach are serving to balance the pillow, the yellow pillow, which doesn't exist over here. And this short lightness, this short shape over here is actually balancing out the lighter shape over here. And the shadows are also serving to do some balance work. So this is approximate symmetry. We can divide it in half, but there's different things going on to create variety and visual interest, so it's not just dull and boring. Asymmetry or asymmetrical balance is where position, weight, and direction really come into play. And there is no obvious axis. Basically, you understand that there is an axis, but sometimes it's hard to find, so you look for implied lines. You look for repeated directions. You look for a dominant continuation of line, implied line through the piece. And with asymmetry, you can have a very dynamic, energized piece, very active. Asymmetry is not static. Asymmetry allows for a lot of variation and a lot of expression within the design. So this piece by Fetty is asymmetrically balanced, and the balance point is basically almost through the center, coming up to the collar, the side of the nose, and going straight up. So this half is balancing this half, but it's not a mirror image. In this Monet, the axis is straight up there, going through the fruit and straight up through the bulk of the vase into the flowers up between these two guys and then out of the image area. And the bulk and lightness of this is balanced by the brightness of the colors here and the horizontal reach of the fruit going this direction. In this piece, this is David, the axis is actually on the diagonal, and the reach of the red, the kind of perpendicular reach of the white on the horse, pulling around into the buttock and thigh on the horse. The whiteness and the light-dark contrast between the shadows and the white and the red are actually balancing each other out. But the axis is definitely going this way. There's a real strong implied line there, and goes kind of lower left to upper right. Notice here also that everything is on a diagonal, which gives it a lot of action. We get the sense that this guy is moving, there's some wind, the horse is prancing, we're raring to go. Another kind of balance is radial balance, and that's where you will have two or more axes. They can cross perpendicularly or not. You can have multiple axes that crisscross. But what's going on here obviously is the axis that comes straight down through the vertical center and straight across. Actually, this is the vertical center, this is the horizontal center. So we have two axes there, but then we have axes from corner to corner, going from the center of the circles. And so there's basically 8 axes on this, this design. And basically, radial balance is going to give you a strong focal point. It's kind of like a radial composition. Diagram for a dome. An architectural dome, and obviously very much radial. This is an actual dome that is radially balanced. And the last kind of balance is crystallographic, in which you have no axis. Basically, crystallographic is, it refers to an all-over surface pattern that where the entire surface of the design, the entire picture plane, is equally weighted. There is no large to small, dark to light, simple to complex. It's all scattered across the picture plane evenly. And so there is no need for a counterbalance, because there's no part of the design that would be out of balance without the counterbalance. So we look at this wall treatment, and it is crystallographically balanced. It's an all-over pattern. And this textile design is also an all-over pattern. We have, again, repeated elements. There is no axis. There's these stripes are actually not axes against which things are balancing, but the pattern just extends across the design space with some variation, but no real change. There's nothing larger that needs to be balanced by something smaller. It is scattered evenly across the surface.